destroyed, their names slandered. Our true church history, though, must ever seek to find this silver stream of believers that were never a part of Rome. They were in the valleys of the Piedmont between northern Italy and southern France. In the south of France, they went by different names: the Waldenses, the Albigenses, the Cathars, the Donatists.
Yet in spite of Rome's efforts to destroy them, the ancient faith of the Pilgrim Church would prevail, and their example would influence the great men of faith that would follow. When the Reformation occurred in the 16th century, Rome would accuse Martin Luther, saying he only renewed the heresies of the Waldenses and Albigenses, which had long ago been condemned. But before the time of Luther, the faith of the Pilgrim Church would shine forth in the man who would be known as the morning star of the Protestant Reformation. The first complete Bible in the English language is attributed to John Wycliffe, who would translate the scriptures from Latin into what is called Middle English by about 1384.
John Wycliffe is really called the morning star of the Reformation because Wycliffe believed things that the Reformers picked up and believed more than 100 years later, like William Tyndale and Martin Luther and those Reformers at that time.
Wycliffe trained his followers to go out and preach to the people. They were known as Lollards and were so effective, it was said that if a man met two men on the street in England, one of them would be a Lollard. But because England was still a Catholic country, Wycliffe's followers suffered greatly, and many of them were put to death.
During the 14th century, before the onset of the English Protestant Reformation, Lollards, when they were captured, they were burned at the stake, and if they had any copies of Wycliffe's translation, then those translations were tied around their necks, and those translations were burned along with their owners.
Like the Pilgrim Church that had come before him, Wycliffe taught that the authority of the Scriptures was greater than the authority of any man. He said that we ought to believe in the authority of no man unless he say the word of God, that if any man in earth, either angel of heaven, teacheth us contrary of holy writ, we should flee from him as from the foul fiend of hell, and hold us steadfastly to the truth and freedom of the holy gospel of Jesus Christ. In addition to translating the scriptures, Wycliffe became known for rejecting the most deadly doctrine of the Dark Ages, transubstantiation.
J.C. Ryle makes it clear in his writings why the Reformers were under attack, because they went against what the Roman Catholic Church was for. For example, here's what he wrote. The point I refer to is the special reason why our Reformers were burned. The principal reason why they were burned was because they refused one of the peculiar doctrines of the Romish Church. On that doctrine, in almost every case, hinged their life or death. If they admitted it, they might live. If they refused it, they must die. The doctrine in question was the real presence of the body and blood of Christ in the consecrated elements of bread and wine in the Lord's Supper.
And just about everybody who was tried for their rejection of transubstantiation. And so what we have here is Rome coming down hard and saying, you know, you have to bow to the host because that is Jesus Christ. And that's why you don't let the host drop on the ground, because that is Jesus Christ. And you have the whole development of the Mass, which is a re-crucifixion of the Lord Jesus Christ, because literally they teach that the body and the blood of Christ is literally, physically, actually there in the elements.
As stated before, Wycliffe boldly rejected this doctrine. In his lifetime, the Catholic authorities tried to condemn him for heresy, but failed repeatedly. Nevertheless, decades after his death, Rome would officially accurse him to the uttermost.
Rome hated Wycliffe so much for bringing forth the Bible in English. It was the first complete Bible in English, and Rome hated him so much for that that they actually exhumed his corpse and smashed it to pieces and actually burnt the bone fragments.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Arundel, had called Wycliffe a child of the old devil who had crowned his wickedness by translating the scriptures into the mother tongue. In 1428, the Church of Rome ordered Wycliffe's bones dug up and burned.
Out of the Lutterworth churchyard, they burned them to ashes and dumped them into the river Swift. Now the historian says that the river Swift ran into the Severn and the Severn into the narrow seas, thus illustrating how Wycliffe's doctrine spread throughout the world.
Indeed, the teachings of John Wycliffe and the Bible he translated would continue to influence Christianity right up to the present day, and would dramatically impact the greatest event of the Middle Ages. As the Council of Constance had condemned John Wycliffe, it also condemned one of his most notable followers, a passionate reformer in Bohemia named Jan Hus, whose disciples were called Hussites. Inspired by Wycliffe, Hus opposed the doctrine of papal infallibility and asserted the authority of the Bible over the opinions of church leaders. As a result, he was condemned as a heretic and burned at the stake in 1415. But before he died, he claimed that God had given him a promise. The name Hus means goose in the Czech language, and so the Lord had told him, "They will silence the goose, but in 100 years I will raise a swan from your ashes that no one will be able to silence." A century later, inspired in part by the sermons of Hus, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, an event that would launch the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. While it is often thought that the Reformation was somehow an anti-Catholic movement, the reality is that most of the reformers began as Catholic priests.
All these guys originally were Roman Catholic priests. Wycliffe was a Roman Catholic priest, but he came to know Christ as his Savior, and that changed his theology. And then the same way with William Tyndale. He was defrocked there in Velvoorde Castle. He was a Roman Catholic priest.
The same was true of Jan Hus and others such as John Knox, Ulrich Zwingli, and most famously, Martin Luther. It might be said that Luther had broken the dam of a great flood that had been gathering for centuries because of the controversies with the Albigenses and the Waldenses, because of John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, and Jerome of Prague, a friend of Hus, who, with many others, were condemned by Rome and burned at the stake for reading and believing the Holy Scriptures. There can be no question that the Bible itself was the weapon of choice used by the Reformers, who took up the shield of faith and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Yet there were certain conditions that came about in Luther's time that made a Reformation possible, not just in Germany, but throughout all Europe. One of them was the invention of movable type by a man named Johann Gutenberg in 1440.
Johann Gutenberg, who has invented not the printing press, but the movable type that you could take apart, put back together. Gutenberg started out as a goldsmith. There had been printing on wood blocks for quite some time, but he makes it easy because you can make type and then reformat that type. And so they start producing numerous books of the Reformation, numerous Bibles of the Reformation.
Prior to Gutenberg's invention, producing just one Bible took the average scribe some 10 months to copy. But in 1455, Johann Gutenberg published the now famous Gutenberg Bible, along with 200 copies in a single year. For centuries, Rome had been burning Bibles, along with the books written by men like Wycliffe and others. But now, these books could be reproduced at unprecedented levels.
And that's why Luther could have such an influence. That's why Tyndale could have such an influence. That's why just books were starting to be printed that a scribe didn't have to sit down in 10 months to do a Wycliffe Bible. You could do it in a matter of weeks now, a bunch of them, and get them out. So boy, that's what really fueled the Reformation.
Gutenberg's first Bible was based on the Latin Vulgate, originally translated by Jerome in the 4th century.
Vulgate simply means vulgar, the common language.
John Wycliffe's translation had also been based on Latin manuscripts, although it has been disputed what manuscripts they were. Yet Wycliffe and others acknowledged that the original writings of the Bible were mostly in Hebrew and Greek. The Jewish scribes had carefully preserved the writings of the Old Testament in the Hebrew language, with selective passages in Aramaic. Meanwhile, the writings of the New Testament were recorded in Koine Greek. Which brings us to the second great event that brought forth the Reformation: the fall of Constantinople in 1453.